My mother returned from the dead after 18 months, not to hug me, but to slowly poison my grandmother and steal our house with a fake will she forged while in prison. I am sitting here shaking because I just destroyed her life to save my own, and I do not know if I am the hero or the villain of this tragedy. Brenda walked back into our lives in Ohio, wearing designer clothes and preaching about healing. But beneath the surface, she was drowning in gambling debt to dangerous men. She gaslighted my grandmother, Martha, into believing she was losing her mind, systematically drugging her tea to force a power of attorney signature. I watched the person I love most deteriorate because of my mother's greed. I had to make a choice: let my grandmother die in a cheap nursing home, or use my own mother's narcissism against her. I rigged the house with cameras. I played the role of the greedy accomplice. I fed her ego until she admitted to everything on tape. Now she is gone, taken by the very debts she tried to outrun. And I am left with a deed and a broken heart. I won the game, but I feel like I lost my soul. Everyone says I was brave, but I feel like a traitor. Please help me. Xiao Yu Ting Hao Ling. 2# is greater than how do you live with yourself after doing something like this? My name is Clara Vance. I am 20 years old, and I smell like stale coffee and cheap maple syrup. That is the scent of survival. I work the graveyard shift at Denny's off the interstate in Dayton, Ohio, serving grand slams to truckers and insomniacs, because I learned very early on that the only thing standing between a person and total oblivion is a checking account with a positive balance. I do not have parents in the traditional sense. I have biology, and I have trauma. My father was a ghost who vanished before I could form a memory, and my mother, Brenda, was a hurricane who vanished whenever responsibility appeared on the horizon. For the last 18 months, my life had finally found a rhythm. I lived with my grandmother, Martha, in her paid-off Victorian house on the edge of the suburbs. It was an old house, smelling of lavender and dust, with creaky floorboards that groaned under the weight of history. To most people, it was just a drafty building that needed a new roof. To me, it was a fortress. It was the only asset in our family name, the only thing that kept us from the trailer park down the road where Brenda used to drag me when I was a child. I was fiercely protective of this house, and of Martha, even though her kindness was often her biggest weakness. It was a Tuesday night in November when the peace broke. The rain was hammering against the vinyl siding, a relentless, cold Midwestern downpour that rattled the window panes. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes from our modest dinner of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Martha was in the living room, knitting something shapeless and watching a game show at a volume that was slightly too loud. It was boring. It was mundane. It was perfect. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a hesitant ring. It was a long, confident press, demanding attention. My stomach dropped. Nobody visits at 9 o'clock on a stormy Tuesday unless it is the police or a tragedy. I dried my hands on a dish rag, feeling the rough cotton against my skin, and walked to the foyer. I saw Martha struggle to get up from her recliner, her joints stiff with arthritis. I told her to sit down. I told her I would get it. I wish I had kept the door locked. When I pulled the heavy oak door open, the wind whipped rain into the entryway, soaking the rug, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a heat rising in my chest, a mixture of shock and instant chemical rage. Standing on the porch, framed by the darkness and the rain, was Brenda. She had been gone for a year and a half. The last time I saw her, she was screaming at a lamppost, looking skeletal and gray, her eyes hollowed out by whatever substance she was chasing that week. I expected her to return eventually. Addicts always return when they run out of options. I expected her to look broken. I expected her to beg. I was wrong. Brenda looked radiant. She was wearing a beige trench coat that looked like it cost more than my car. Her blonde hair was perfectly highlighted and blown out, bouncing on her shoulders. Her skin was not gray. It was tanned, glowing with health and expensive moisturizer. She held a Louis Vuitton carry-on bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She smiled at me. It was not a motherly smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. "Hello, Clara," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of the raspy edge I remembered. "Are you not going to invite your mother in out of the rain?" I stood frozen, gripping the door frame until my knuckles turned white. My brain was trying to reconcile the image of the monster from my childhood with this polished stranger standing on my porch. Before I could slam the door in her face, I heard the shuffle of slippers behind me. Martha gasped. "Brenda?" Martha's voice was a tremble, a fragile sound of hope that made me want to vomit. "Oh, my God, Brenda, you came back." Brenda stepped inside, pushing past me as if I were merely the doorman. She dropped her expensive luggage on the floor and enveloped my grandmother in a hug that looked theatrical. She buried her face in Martha's shoulder, and I watched her eyes over Martha's back. They were dry. They were calculating. They scanned the room, checking the furniture, the paintings, the silver candlesticks on the mantel. She was appraising the inventory. I closed the door, shutting out the storm, but trapping something far more dangerous inside. The next hour was a masterclass in manipulation. Brenda insisted we sit at the dining table. She poured the wine she had brought, a deep red vintage that smelled like oak and berries. I refused a glass. I sat across from her, my arms crossed, watching her every move. I watched how she held the stem of the glass, her pinky finger extended. Her nails were manicured. A perfect French tip. That was my first red flag. Rehab facilities do not give French manicures. She told us a story that sounded like it had been ripped from a daytime talk show. She said she had been in Arizona. She said she had spent the last 18 months at a wellness retreat in Sedona, finding herself, healing her inner child, and purging the toxins from her spirit. I had to step away. "Mom," Brenda said, reaching across the table to squeeze Martha's hand. Martha was weeping silently, tears of joy streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "I was toxic. I was hurting you both. I needed to go into the desert to find the light again. It was a spiritual awakening." I stared at her. "Arizona? A wellness retreat? 18 months ago, she stole Martha's social security check to buy pills. Now she was talking about chakras and energy fields. How did you pay for it?" I asked. My voice was cold, sharp as a knife, cutting through the warm, humid air of the dining room. Brenda paused. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes locking with mine over the rim of the glass. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the flash of annoyance. The old Brenda who hated being questioned. But she blinked, and the serene guru returned. "I have friends who believe in me. Clara," she said softly. "Angels. Really, they sponsored my recovery because they saw my potential. And now, I am back to make amends. I am back to take care of my mother and my daughter." I felt a bile rise in my throat. I looked at Martha. She was nodding, eating up every lie, desperate to believe that her little girl was finally fixed. This was the cycle. The hope, the belief, and then the inevitable crash. But this time, the lie was too polished. It was too shiny. "You are lying," I said. I did not shout. I just said it flatly. "You did not go to a retreat in Sedona. You look like you just walked off a yacht. Where did you really go?" "Brenda, Clara," Martha snapped at me, slamming her hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "How dare you? Your mother has come home. She looks healthy. She looks beautiful. Why must you always be so suspicious? Why are you so hard?" I looked at my grandmother, the woman I had spent every day protecting, bathing, and feeding while Brenda was gone. The betrayal stung more than a slap. Brenda had been in the house for less than 60 minutes, and she had already turned the matriarch against me. Brenda sickhead. A long, suffering sound. "It is okay, Mom," she told Martha, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Clara has a lot of anger. That is my fault. I abandoned her. She has abandonment issues. I learned about this in therapy. We have to give her space to process her trauma." She looked at me with those pitying eyes, that condescending, "I know better than you look." It was the look of someone who thought she had already won. She picked up her wine glass to propose a toast. "To new beginnings," Brenda said, smiling, "and to family being together again. In this beautiful house." That was it. The mention of the house. She did not care about us. She cared about the real estate. The anger I had been bottling up for 18 months. The nights I spent crying myself to sleep, wondering if she was dead in a ditch. The double shifts at the diner to pay the property tax she left behind. It all surged into my right hand. I did not think. I just reacted. I grabbed my water glass. Heavy, thick glass. And I did not throw the water. I threw the glass. No, that is not right. I did not throw the glass at her. I swiped my hand across the table, catching the stem of her wine glass just as she raised it to her lips. The movement was violent and precise. The wine glass shattered against the edge of the table. Red wine exploded outward, drenching Brenda's beige trench coat, splashing across her face like a gruesome arterial spray. She shrieked, jumping back, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Clara?" Martha screamed. Horrified, Brenda stood there, red wine dripping from her chin, staining her expensive blouse. For a heartbeat, there was silence. I waited for her to lunge at me. I waited for the street fighter Brenda to come out swinging, but she did not. Instead, she began to cry, not the angry tears of a drunk, but the soft, wounded sobs of a victim. She looked at Martha, her eyes wide and terrified, trembling as if I were an abuser. "I am sorry," Brenda sobbed, wiping the wine from her cheek. "I am so sorry I made you hate me this much." "Clara, I just wanted to come home. Get out," Martha hissed. I looked at my grandmother, expecting her to be pointing at the door for Brenda. But she was not looking at Brenda. She was looking at me. Her eyes were hard, filled with a disappointment that crushed my chest. "Get out of this room." "Clara," Martha said, her voice shaking. "Go to your room. I will not have this violence in my house. Your mother is trying. Look at what you did." I looked down at the red stain spreading on the white tablecloth. It looked like blood. I looked at Brenda. She was burying her face in a napkin. But I saw it. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward, just a fraction of an inch. She had won the first round without even throwing a punch. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked out of the dining room. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, listening to the murmurs of comfort Martha was offering the monster downstairs. I went into my room and locked the door. I sat on my bed in the dark, listening to the rain batter the roof, and I realized then that the peace was over. The house was no longer a fortress. The gates had been breached, and the enemy was already drinking our wine. The sofa in the living room was not designed for sleeping. It was a lumpy, floral-patterned antique that smelled of mothballs and old dog hair, and the center cushion had collapsed years ago, creating a sinkhole that trapped my hips in a permanent state of misalignment. I woke up with a stiff neck and a throbbing headache, the morning light piercing through the thin curtains I had failed to close properly the night before. This was my new reality. Less than 24 hours after her grand return, Brenda had decided that my bedroom, the sanctuary I had painted a soft gray and filled with my used paperbacks and secondhand posters, was the only room in the house with the correct spiritual alignment for her recovery. She called it feng shui. I called it an eviction. I need a space to center my chakras. Clara, she had said over breakfast, peeling a grapefruit with the precision of a surgeon. The guest room faces north. That is bad energy. Your room faces east. It welcomes the sun. I need the sun to heal. I had looked at Martha, expecting her to intervene. That was my room. It was where I studied for my general educational development tests. It was where I hid when the world felt too heavy. But Martha just sipped her coffee, her eyes avoiding mine. Let your mother have the room, Clara, Martha had mumbled. She has been through so much. You are young. You can adapt. The sofa is perfectly comfortable. So, I adapted. I adapted by lying awake until 3 a.m, listening to Brenda dragging my furniture across the floorboards above my head. Every scrape of wood against wood felt like she was carving her name into my territory. By the time I sat up and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, the house had changed. The smell of bacon grease and stale coffee, the usual sense of our mornings, was gone. Instead, the air was thick with the cloying, smoky, heavy scent of burning white sage. I walked into the kitchen, my back cracking audibly. Brenda was there, humming a tune I did not recognize. She was wearing a silk kimono that tied loosely at her waist, exposing just enough skin to be inappropriate for a Tuesday morning with her daughter. The kitchen counter, usually cluttered with Martha's medication bottles and bills, was swept clean. In the center of the counter sat a row of expensive-looking canisters. Green powders, brown roots, chia seeds. Good morning. Sunshine. Brenda chirped, not looking up from the blender she was assembling. You look like you slept terrible. You really should work on your sleep hygiene. It is all about the circadian rhythms. I ignored her and went to the coffee pot. It was empty. I poured it out. Brenda said casually, "Caffeine is a toxin. It calcifies the pineal gland. We are drinking herbal tea now." She gestured to a steaming ceramic pot on the stove. I stared at the empty glass carafe of the coffee maker, feeling a vein in my forehead pulse. She was not just moving in. She was erasing our routine. She was colonizing us. I need coffee. Brenda, I said, my voice raspy. I have a double shift at the diner. You need to detox. She corrected me. I turned away from her, my hands shaking with a mixture of caffeine withdrawal and pure hatred, and walked toward the hallway closet to get my uniform. I opened the door, expecting to see my black slacks and apron hanging on the hook where I always left them. The hook was empty. In fact, the entire bottom half of the closet was empty. My sneakers were gone. My winter coat was gone. I froze. A cold dread washed over me, replacing the anger. I turned around and walked back into the kitchen. Where are my clothes? I asked. Brenda turned on the blender. The noise was deafening, a mechanical scream that drowned out my question. She smiled at me, pointing to her ear as if to say, I cannot hear you. I waited. I stood there for a full minute while she blended her sludge of kale and hypocrisy. Finally, she turned it off. Where are my clothes? I repeated, stepping closer. Oh, those? She said, pouring the green liquid into a glass. I did you a favor. I was clearing out the stagnant energy in the house, and I realized how much low vibration clutter you were holding on to. Polyester uniforms? Old sneakers? Clara, you dress like a peasant. It affects your self-worth. Where are they? I demanded. On the curb, she said, taking a sip of her smoothie. The garbage truck comes today. Does it not? I ran out the front door, barefoot, onto the cold concrete of the porch. The garbage truck was already halfway down the street, its hydraulic compactor whining as it crushed the neighborhood's refuse. I looked at the end of our driveway. 3 black plastic trash bags sat there. I sprinted down the driveway, the gravel digging into the soles of my feet. I ripped open the first bag. Inside was my life, my black work pants, stained with grease but clean, my biology textbooks, the photo album I had saved from the damp basement, the teddy bear my father gave me before he left, the one with the missing eye. Brenda had thrown them away like they were rot. I fell to my knees, clutching the teddy bear. It smelled of sage and garbage. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry over a stuffed animal. I dragged the bags back up the driveway, one by one, heaving them onto the porch. When I walked back inside, carrying the bags, Martha was coming down the stairs. She looked at me, disheveled and panting, holding trash bags. Clara, what on earth are you doing? Martha asked. She threw my things away. Grandma, I said, my voice trembling. She put my clothes in the garbage. Martha looked at Brenda. Brenda was leaning against the counter, looking the picture of innocence. Mom, I was just trying to help her declutter, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a soothing register. Hoarding is a sign of trauma. I read about it. She is holding on to the past. I wanted to make space for new blessings. Martha looked back at me. She sighed, a long, weary sigh that told me everything I needed to know. She did not want to deal with this. She wanted the fantasy of the happy family, and I was the one ruining the scene. Clara, just take your things back to Xiaoyujing Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than the living room. Martha said, and please, do not shout. Your mother is just trying to help. In her own way. I stared at Martha. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but a quiet, brittle fracture. The grandmother who had raised me was gone. She had been replaced by a woman who would set herself on fire to keep her daughter warm. I carried my bags to the living room and shoved them behind the sofa. I did not say another word. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and put on my wrinkled uniform. When I came out, Brenda was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a magazine about luxury travel. She had a new cup of tea in front of her. A special tea. This is my morning cleanse, she announced to the room, though nobody had asked. It is imported from Peru. $80 a bag. It flushes the toxins right out of your system. I looked at the box on the counter. Peruvian slimming tea. High potency. A dark, cold idea formed in my mind. It was not impulsive like the wine glass incident. It was calculated. It was mean. It was exactly what she deserved. I waited until she went upstairs to use the bathroom. My bathroom. As soon as her footsteps faded, I moved. I opened the cabinet where Martha kept her old medications. I found the box of laxatives she had used after her hip surgery 2 years ago. They were extra strength, the kind they give you before a colonoscopy. I took 4 pills. No, I took 6. I placed them on the counter and used the bottom of a heavy spice jar to crush them into a fine, white powder. I worked quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs, my ears straining for the sound of her return. The powder looked innocent. It looked like sugar. I walked over to her steaming mug of $80 tea. The liquid was dark and murky. I tipped the powder in. I grabbed a spoon and stirred it. 1, 2, 3 swirls. The powder dissolved instantly. I rinsed the spoon and put it in the drying rack. When Brenda came back down, she looked refreshed. She sat down, picked up the mug, and took a long, deep sip. She hummed. "You can taste the purity. You should really try some. Clara, it cleans you out." I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. "No thanks," I said. "I think I will stick to water." I left for work before the effects kicked in. I spent 8 hours serving pancakes and refilling coffee cups, my mind replaying the image of her drinking that tea. It was the only thing that got me through the shift. When I got home that night, the house was dark. It was quiet, too quiet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I walked past the kitchen. The mug was sitting in the sink, empty. I went to the living room and lay down on the lumpy sofa. I pulled my thin blanket up to my chin. Just as I was closing my eyes, I heard it from the downstairs bathroom. There was a groan, a low, guttural sound of absolute misery. Then, the sound of the toilet flushing. Then silence. Then, another groan, louder this time, followed by a whimper. Brenda Vance, the guru of Sedona, the woman who had returned to cleanse our energy, was currently purging a lot more than just toxins. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. I listened to my mother suffer, and for the first time in 18 months, I felt a sense of control. "Sleep tight, Mom," I whispered to the darkness, and then I closed my eyes and slept like a baby. The house had become a minefield. For 3 days following the tea incident, Brenda moved through the hallways like a wounded ghost. She was pale, her grandiose energy depleted by the violent purging of her system. She spent most of her time in my bedroom. Now, her bedroom, lying in the dark with a cold compress on her forehead, moaning theatrically whenever Martha walked past the open door. Martha, of course, was doting. She carried trays of toast and electrolyte water up the stairs, whispering soothing words to the woman who was slowly dismantling our lives. I watched it all from the shadows. I was the silent observer, the ghost in the machine. My victory with the laxatives was sweet, but it was temporary. I knew Brenda. She was like a cockroach. She could survive a nuclear winter, and she certainly would not let a bout of diarrhea stop her agenda. The truce broke on a Thursday night. It was 2 a.m. The house was settling, the wood contracting in the cooling air. I was awake on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brenda's smile, that predator's grin masked in lip gloss. Then I heard it. It was a voice, low, urgent, and coming from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, the old springs of the sofa groaning in protest. I held my breath, waiting to see if the noise had alerted anyone. Silence. I slipped my feet onto the cold floor and crept toward the kitchen. The hallway was pitch black, but a sliver of pale yellow light spilled from under the kitchen door. I pressed my ear against the wood. Please, you have to give me more time, Brenda hissed. Her voice was not the melodic, soothing tone she used with Martha. This was the voice I remembered from my childhood, the desperate, jagged edge of a woman cornered. I told you, the assets are tied up in probate. Sao yu Tsinghaoling, due cancelletto e maggiore di no. She is not dead yet, but she is old. She is very old. It is practically a waiting game. My blood ran cold. She is not dead yet. I pressed harder against the door. Do not threaten me, Brenda snapped, her voice rising slightly before dropping back to a whisper. If you come to the house, you get nothing. I need 2 weeks. Just give me 2 weeks to get the power of attorney sorted out. Once I have the signature, I can liquidate. Yes, I promise. There was a pause. Stop calling this number. I will call you. I heard the beep of the call ending. I scrambled backward, moving as fast and as silently as a spider, retreating to the darkness of the living room just as the kitchen door creaked open. I dove onto the sofa and pulled the blanket up, feigning sleep. Through the slit of my eyelids, I saw Brenda walk past. She was not glowing. In the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the window, she looked haggard. She looked like a woman who was being hunted. The next morning, the atmosphere was brittle. Brenda was back to her performance, talking about light energy and forgiveness over breakfast. But her hands were shaking. She dropped a spoon. She spilled her tea. Her eyes darted to the window every time a car drove past. I went to work, but my mind was not on the eggs and bacon I was serving. It was on that phone call, power of attorney, liquidate. She was not here to heal. She was here to strip the carcass of our family fortune before the body was even cold. I needed proof. My word was worthless against her charisma. I needed something solid, something legal, something that would shatter Martha's delusion once and for all. 2 days later, I found my opportunity. It was a Saturday. Martha had gone to her bridge club, a rare outing she had maintained for 20 years. Brenda had claimed she had a headache and stayed home. I was supposed to be at the library studying, but I doubled back. I parked my beat-up sedan 2 streets over and walked through the neighbor's yard. Slipping into the house through the back door I knew had a faulty lock. The house was silent. I moved toward Martha's study, a small room off the main hallway where my grandmother kept her important papers. The door was ajar. I peeked inside. Brenda was there. She was kneeling in front of the heavy iron safe that sat in the corner of the room. It was an old safe, a relic from my grandfather, containing the deed to the house, Martha's life insurance policy, and her modest jewelry collection. Brenda had a stethoscope, a literal stethoscope. She was pressing the bell against the metal door of the safe, turning the dial slowly, her tongue poking out from the corner of her lips in concentration. It was almost comical, like a scene from a bad heist movie. But the reality was terrifying. "What are you doing?" I asked. Brenda jumped. She actually jumped, dropping the stethoscope. It clattered against the hardwood floor. She spun around, her eyes wide. For a second, just a split second, I saw pure guilt. Then, the mask slammed back into place. "Clara," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "You scared me to death." Why are you sneaking around like a thief? I am sneaking? I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. You are the one trying to crack Grandma's safe with a doctor's toy. Brenda stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. She composed herself, smoothing down her silk blouse. Do not be ridiculous. I was not cracking it. I was Ling. 2# is greater than testing the mechanism. Mom mentioned the dial was sticking. I wanted to fix it for her. I was worried she might get locked out of her own documents. You are lying, I said, stepping into the room. You want the deed. You want to sell the house. Brenda's face hardened. The warmth evaporated. And what if I do? She challenged, her voice dropping to a low, icy register. Do you have any idea how much this place costs to maintain? The heating bills alone are drowning her. I am trying to save her from bankruptcy. Clara, I am the only one thinking about the future. You are thinking about your debt. I shot back. I heard you on the phone. Brenda, I heard you talking about liquidating assets. Who do you owe? A dealer? A bookie? Brenda stepped closer to me. She was taller than I was, and she used that height now, looming over me. You have a very vivid imagination. Clara, maybe you should write fiction, but nobody will believe you. You are just the angry, jealous daughter who cannot stand that her mother is back and doing better than her. Go ahead, tell Martha. See who she believes. She brushed past me, her shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble. She walked out of the room, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and rot in her wake. She was right. Martha would not believe me, not without evidence. I went to my bank that afternoon. I stood at the teller window, my hands trembling as I slid my withdrawal slip across the counter. How much would you like to withdraw, Miss Vance? The teller asked. $3,000. I said. The teller paused. That is nearly the entire balance of your savings account. I know, I said. Just give it to me. That money was my escape fund. It was 2 years of tips, 2 years of missing parties, 2 years of eating ramen noodles. It was my tuition for the nursing program at the community college starting in the fall. I took the envelope of cash. It felt heavy, like a brick. I drove to a strip mall on the south side of town, nestled between a pawn shop and a liquor store. The sign on the door said J. Miller Investigations. The office smelled of stale cigarette smoke and despair. Joe Miller was a man who looked like he had been divorced 4 times and slept in his car. He had a coffee stain on his tie and eyes that had seen too much. I sat across from him and placed the envelope on the desk. I need to know where Brenda Vance was for the last 18 months. I said, she says she was at a wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona called the Golden Mesa. Mr. Miller opened the envelope and thumbed through the bills. He did not ask why a 20-year-old waitress was investigating her mother. He just nodded. I will find her. He grunted. Give me 48 hours. The next 2 days were an agony of waiting. Brenda continued her charade. She started cooking elaborate dinners for Martha, talking about how they should look into reverse mortgages to free up cash flow for travel. Martha was listening. That was the scariest part. Martha was nodding along, enchanted by the idea of seeing Paris before she died. On Tuesday afternoon, I got a text from Mr. Miller. Come by. I skipped my shift at the diner. I told my manager I was sick. I drove to the strip mall, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Mr. Miller was waiting for me. He held a manila folder in his hands. He did not look triumphant. He looked bored. Here is your guru, he said, sliding the folder across the scratched laminate of his desk. I opened it. The The first page was a mugshot. It was Brenda, but not the Brenda of today. This woman had dark roots, dull skin, and a defiant sneer. The date on the booking photo was 16 months ago. Brenda Vance. The report read, Inmate number 89,402, Ohio State Reformatory for Women. She had not been in Arizona. She had not been meditating in the desert. She had been less than 50 miles away. Sitting in a cell, I scanned the charges. Credit card fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. Mr. Miller pointed a thick finger at the second page. She ran a scam in Columbus, he explained, his voice gravelly. She was stealing credit card numbers from the elderly people she was supposedly caretaking for. She got caught trying to open a line of credit in a dead man's name. She served 16 months. She got out on parole 3 weeks ago. Parole. I whispered, there is more. Mr. Miller said. He flipped to the last page. While she was inside, she got into some trouble with a gambling ring they run in the cell block. High-stakes poker. She owes a lot of money to a syndicate that has connections on the outside. Nasty people. That is probably why she came home. She needs a hideout, and she needs cash fast. I stared at the papers. The words swam before my eyes. Identity theft. Exploitation of the elderly. She was not just a bad mother. She was a professional predator, and her new target was not a stranger. It was her own mother. I closed the folder. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not fear anymore. It was not even anger. It was clarity, cold, sharp, crystalline clarity. For 18 months, I had wondered why she left. I had wondered if I was not good enough, if I had driven her away. But it had nothing to do with me. It never had. Brenda was a parasite looking for a host. And when the host fought back, she moved on. Now, she was back because she was starving. I looked at the mugshot one last time. Thank you. Mr. Miller, I said. I walked out of the office and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I clutched the folder to my chest. I had lost my tuition money. I had lost my safety net. But I had gained something far more valuable. I had the weapon that would destroy her. I sat in my car and looked at the house keys in my hand. I was not going home to scream. I was not going home to cry. I was going home to wait. Brenda thought she was playing a game of chess with a senile old woman and a naive child. She did not realize that the child had just bought the rule book. I started the engine. The engine roared to life, sounding like a beast waking up. Game on, Mother, I whispered. The drive home felt like a coronation procession. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat of my rusted sedan, vibrating with the potential energy of a bomb. I kept glancing at it, running my hand over the smooth paper surface. Inside was the truth. Inside was the silver bullet that would put the werewolf down for good. I imagined the look on Martha's face when she saw the mugshot. I imagined the stuttering, pathetic excuses Brenda would try to invent before the police arrived to drag her back to whatever hole she had crawled out of. I was naive. I was so incredibly naive. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires like applause. I grabbed the folder and marched to the front door. I did not unlock it. I threw it open. The scene in the living room was aggressively domestic. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow over the room. Martha was sitting in her recliner, a photo album spread across her lap. Brenda was sitting on the floor by her feet, resting her head against Martha's knee. It was a tableau of generational love, a Norman Rockwell painting titled The Prodigal Mother Returns. They both looked up as I stormed in. The air in the room shifted instantly, the warmth sucked out by the vortex of my anger. "Clara?" Martha asked, adjusting her glasses. "You are home early. Is everything all right?" "Stop it," I said. My voice was loud, echoing off the high ceilings. "Stop the act. It is over." "Brenda." I walked over to them and tossed the folder onto Martha's lap, right on top of the old family photos. It landed with a heavy slap. "What is this?" Martha asked, her hands hovering over it. "Open it," I commanded. "Look at your daughter, Grandma. Look at where she really was while she was finding herself in Arizona." Brenda did not move. She did not lunge for the folder. She did not try to stop Martha. She just sat there on the floor, looking up at me with a sorrowful expression that made my skin crawl. She looked like she was watching a dog that needed to be put down. Martha opened the folder. She stared at the mugshot. She stared at the booking number. She read the charges. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the rage. Instead, Martha closed the folder slowly and looked at Brenda. "She did it," Brenda whispered. "She actually did it?" "Did what?" I demanded. "What are you talking about?" Martha looked at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. But they were not tears of betrayal. They were tears of pity. "Clara?" Martha said, her voice trembling. "Why did you make this?" My jaw dropped. "Make it?" I did not make it. I hired a private investigator. That is a police record. "Grandma, she was in prison for identity theft." Brenda stood up slowly. She walked over to the mantel and picked up a stack of papers I had not noticed before. She held them out to Martha. "I did not want to show you this, Mom," Brenda said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I found these in Clara's room when I was cleaning. I found them on her laptop. She has been so Yuting Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than she has been doctoring photos. She has been writing fake police reports." "What?" I screamed. I felt the floor tilting beneath my feet. "You are lying. Show her." "Mom," Brenda said gently. Martha picked up the papers Brenda had handed her. I stepped closer to see what they were. They were emails. Emails supposedly sent from my account to a graphic design service. Subject: fake mugshot project. Body: I need you to make my mother look like a criminal. I will pay extra for rush delivery. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never written those. I had never seen them before. "She hacked me," I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Brenda. "She planted those. She is gaslighting you. Grandma, can you not see it? She is the criminal." Martha stood up, the folder sliding to the floor. "Clara, stop it," Martha shouted. "Just stop. Your mother told me about your episodes." She showed me the letter from the school counselor. "What letter?" I gasped. "The one about your paranoia." Brenda interjected smoothly. "The one about your pathological jealousy. I called your college. Clara, they are very concerned about you. They said you have been creating alternate realities to cope with stress." I looked from Martha to Brenda. The walls were closing in. The air was getting too thin to breathe. Brenda had not just covered her tracks. She had built an entire alternate narrative while I was out serving pancakes. She had anticipated my move. She knew I would go looking for dirt, so she had prepared the mud to bury me in. "This is insane," I whispered. "I am not crazy. You are the one who stole credit cards. You are the one who owes money to a gambling ring." Martha covered her ears. "I do not want to hear any more lies." I stepped forward, desperate to grab Martha's hands, to make her look at me, really look at me. "Grandma, please," I begged. Just call the police station. Just check the inmate number. I reached out. Brenda stepped in between us. Stay back. Clara, Brenda warned. You are erratic. You are scaring her. I am not scaring her, I yelled. I shoved Brenda aside. It was not a hard shove. It was a desperate push to get to my grandmother. But Brenda made it count. She stumbled backward, flailing her arms with exaggerated clumsiness. She spun around, her hip colliding with the small pedestal table near the window. On that table sat the blue porcelain vase. It was an antique. It was the only thing Martha had left from her own mother. It had survived 3 moves and 50 years. It did not survive Brenda. The vase tipped. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the blue ceramic arc through the air. I saw the horror on Martha's face. I saw the calculated satisfaction in Brenda's eyes just before she covered her face with her hands. The crash was deafening. Thousands of blue shards exploded across the hardwood floor. A shrapnel of memories, destroyed in an instant. No, Martha wailed, a sound of pure heartbreak. Brenda fell to her knees amidst the wreckage, ignoring the sharp pieces digging into her skin. Oh, God, Brenda cried out. Look what you made me do. Clara, why are you so violent? Why do you want to destroy everything? I stood frozen. My hands were still raised in the air. The incriminating posture of an aggressor. Grandma, I did not. Sao Yu Tsing Haoling. 2 hashes greater than I started. Get out, Martha whispered. She was not looking at the vase. She was looking at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Genuine, primal fear. She looked at me like I was the monster. She looked at me like I was Brenda, Grandma. She did it on purpose. Sao Yu Tsing Haoling. Tsing Hao Dayu. I said, get out. Martha screamed, her voice cracking. Get out of my sight. You are sick, Clara. You are sick and you are dangerous. Brenda looked up from the floor. She wrapped her arms around Martha's legs, burying her face in Martha's skirt. Over the fabric, her eyes locked onto mine. They were cold. They were dead. They were triumphant. You should go. Clara, Brenda said, her voice steady and commanding. Go cool off. I will handle this. I will clean up your mess. Like I always do. I backed away. My heels crunched on a piece of blue porcelain. The sound made me flinch. I looked at the shattered remains of the vase, and I realized it was not just a vase. It was my credibility. It was my place in this family. It was my sanity. I turned and ran. I ran out the front door, leaving it wide open to the night air. I ran to my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I drove. I did not know where I was going. I just drove until the house was a speck in the rearview mirror, until the sobbing in my chest made it impossible to breathe. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed grocery store 3 miles away. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence. I looked at the passenger seat. The folder was gone. I had left it on the floor. Brenda would burn it. She would burn the truth, just like she had shattered the vase. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was alone. I had no money. I had no allies. And now, according to the official record of the Vance household, I had no mind. I laughed. It was a wet, ragged sound in the darkness of the car. She wanted me to be crazy. She wanted me to be the villain. Sao Yu Tsing Haoling, due cancelletto, è maggiore di fine. If I was going to be the villain, I might as well start acting like one. The house was dying. It was not a structural death, though the pipes groaned and the floorboards warped, but a spiritual rot that started from the center and worked its way out. In the week following the incident with the vase, the silence in the hallways became heavy, like a wet wool blanket draped over everything. Martha was fading. It happened with terrifying speed. One day, she was doing crossword puzzles and complaining about the neighbors, and the next, she was a ghost in her own living room. She spent hours staring at the television when it was turned off. She forgot to eat. She called me by my mother's name, and she called my mother by the name of a sister who had died 20 years ago. I watched this transformation with a knot of dread in my stomach that never loosened. Brenda called it decline. She called it the natural progression of age. She walked around with a tragic expression, sighing loudly whenever she had to guide Martha to the bathroom or wipe spilled soup from her chin. Poor dear, Brenda would whisper, loud enough for me to hear. Her mind is just, saluting how, lean, due cancelletto, è maggiore di gone. It is a mercy. Really, she does not know she is suffering. But I knew. Martha was 75, not 90. She had been sharp as a tack 10 days ago. Dementia does not strike like lightning. It creeps like moss. This was not nature. This was chemistry. I stopped eating the food Brenda cooked. I lived on protein bars. I hid in my car and water from the bathroom tap. I watched my grandmother turn into a vegetable, and I felt helpless because I had been branded the crazy one. If I spoke up, if I accused Brenda of poisoning her, I would be the paranoid girl who broke the vase. But paranoia is just a heightened state of awareness. On a Wednesday morning, Brenda went out to meet with a specialist she claimed she had hired for Martha. I knew she was meeting a lawyer or a loan shark, but I did not care. I needed the house empty. As soon as her car pulled away, I went to the kitchen. I did not go to the safe this time. I went to the trash. Brenda was careful, but arrogance makes people sloppy. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was too scared to look again. I pulled the kitchen garbage bag out of the bin and dumped it onto the linoleum floor. Coffee grounds, eggshells, vegetable peelings. The smell was sour and pungent. I sifted through the muck with my bare hands, ignoring the grime under my fingernails. I found it at the bottom, tucked inside an empty carton of almond milk. It was a blister pack. The foil backing was punched out, leaving empty little bubbles where pills used to be. I picked it up, wiping off a smear of tomato sauce. The label was partially torn, but I could read the chemical name, haloperidol. I froze. I knew that name from my nursing textbooks. It was a heavy-duty antipsychotic. It was used to sedate violent patients in psych wards. It was also used, controversially, to manage agitation in dementia patients. But in high doses, in a healthy brain, it would cause confusion, lethargy, muscle stiffness, and memory loss. It would mimic severe cognitive decline. She was not just drugging her to sleep. She was chemically lobotomizing her. I stood up, clutching the foil strip. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so white-hot it felt like it was burning the lining of my stomach. Brenda was erasing my grandmother. She was turning a living, breathing woman into a prop for her legal arguments. Saoyutsing Doi, Clara? I spun around. Brenda was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had come back. I had not heard the car. I had not heard the door. She looked at the garbage on the floor. She looked at the foil strip in my hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. "You are very persistent," Brenda said. Her voice was calm. It was almost impressed. Most people would have given up by now. Most people would have packed a bag and run away to start over. But not you. You tick. Clara, you just dig in deeper. You are poisoning her, I said. I held up the blister pack. Haloperidol. You are melting her brain so you can get power of attorney. Brenda walked into the kitchen, stepping carefully over the pile of trash. She did not look guilty. She looked bored. She reached into her purse and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, something she never did in front of Martha. She lit one, blowing a stream of gray smoke toward the ceiling. Poison is such an ugly word, Brenda said. I prefer to think of it as Soyu Tsinghal Ling. 2 hash is greater than accelerating the inevitable. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. Look at her. Clara. She is old. She is tired. This house is crumbling around her ears. What kind of life is this? Counting pennies? Clipping coupons? Waiting to die? You do not care about her life. I spat. You care about the equity, Brenda laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Of course I care about the equity. And you should too. Do you know how much this place is worth? The land alone is worth $400,000. Developers are tearing down these old shacks and putting up luxury condos. 400,000. She took a step closer to me. The smoke stung my eyes. Think about it. Clara, really think about it. If we put her in a home, a nice home, a state facility, the state pays for it. We sell this place. We pay off my Saoyutsinghao. 2 hash is greater than debts, and there is still plenty left over. She looked me up and down, her eyes landing on my worn-out sneakers. You want to go to nursing school? You want to go to Paris? You want to get out of this dead-end town and stop serving waffles to truckers? We can split it, 50-50. $200,000 for you. Cash. I stared at her. The number hung in the air. $200,000. My inner voice, the one that screamed about justice and morality, suddenly went quiet. I thought about the tuition bills. I thought about the debt I was already in. I thought about the cold winters and the fear of never having enough. Brenda saw the hesitation. She saw the hunger in my eyes. She smiled. A genuine, conspiratorial smile. She does not know what is happening. Clara, Brenda whispered, leaning in close. She is happy in her fog. Why should we both suffer just to keep an old woman in a house she cannot even remember? It is a victimless crime. We sell, we split, we leave. You and me, survivors. For 10 seconds, I considered it. I am ashamed to admit it, but I did. I stood there, holding the evidence of her crime, and I calculated the cost of my soul. $200,000 could buy a new life. It could buy freedom. Was Martha really living anymore? Was I just fighting a losing battle for a woman who already looked at me with suspicion? Maybe Brenda was right. Maybe we were the same. Survivors do what they have to do. I opened my mouth. I was about to ask her how we would hide the money. Then, we heard the sound. It came from the hallway. A shuffle of slippers. A confused mumble. We both turned. Martha was standing at the top of the stairs. She was wearing her nightgown, looking frail and translucent in the morning light. She was swaying. Her eyes were glazed over, the drugs clearly peaking in her system. Brenda, Martha called out, her voice thick and slurred. Who is Saoyutsinghao? 2 hash is greater than who is smoking. She took a step forward. Her foot missed the edge of the top step. It happened in slow motion. I saw her slipper slide on the polished wood. I saw her hand grasp for the banister, her fingers stiff and uncooperative. I saw the look of total confusion on her face as gravity took hold. No, I screamed. but I was too far away. Martha tumbled. It was not a graceful fall. It was violent. Her body hit the wooden steps with sickening thuds. Bone against oak, flesh against sharp edges. She rolled and bounced, her limbs flailing like a rag doll. She landed at the bottom of the stairs, right in the hallway, in a heap of flannel and bruised skin. Her head hit the floorboards with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Then, silence. I sprinted from the kitchen. I fell to my knees beside her. Grandma, Grandma. She was not moving. Her eyes were closed. A thin trickle of blood began to seep from her hairline, staining the rug. I looked up. Brenda was standing at the top of the stairs. She had not moved. She was still holding her cigarette. She looked down at her mother's broken body, and for a split second, I saw a flash of relief on her face. If she died, the problem was solved. If she was incapacitated, the problem was solved. Call 911, I screamed at her. Call them. Brenda took a slow drag of her cigarette. She exhaled, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. You should check her pulse first. Clara, she said calmly, no need to rush if it is too late. In that moment, the hesitation I had felt in the kitchen died. The part of me that wanted the money, the part of me that wanted to negotiate, incinerated. I looked at Brenda, looming above us like a vulture, and I felt something shift inside my chest. It was a click, a mechanical locking of gears. I was no longer her daughter. I was no longer her victim. I checked Martha's pulse. It was faint, thready, but it was there. She was alive. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 3 digits. My hands were steady now, perfectly steady. She wanted a war? She wanted to destroy us for a payday? Sao Jing Hao Ling. Due cancelletto e maggiore di fine. I would burn the world down before I let her see a single cent. I looked up at Brenda as the operator answered. I did not blink. She is alive, I said to Brenda, my voice low and venomous, and you are going to wish she was not. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale vending machine coffee, a scent that would forever be linked in my mind to catastrophe. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an irritating frequency, casting a sickly pallor over everything. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my knees pulled up to my chest, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut. Martha was in surgery, a fractured hip, a severe concussion, internal bleeding. The doctors used words like critical and guarded, their faces professionally grim. Across the room, Brenda was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was huddled with a social worker, a young woman with kind eyes and a clipboard who was clearly out of her depth. Brenda was weeping, soft, delicate sobs that shook her shoulders just enough to evoke sympathy without ruining her mascara. I do not know how it happened, Brenda was saying, her voice trembling. I turned my back for 1 second to make her tea. She has been so Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than unsteady lately. I tried to catch her. I tried. She buried her face in her hands. The social worker patted her back, murmuring comforting lies. I watched them, my eyes dry and burning. I felt like I was watching a play from the cheap seats, knowing the actors were reciting a script written in blood. Brenda was laying the groundwork. She was establishing the narrative. Frail mother, devoted daughter, tragic accident. And where do I fit in? I am the unstable granddaughter, the one with the anger issues, the liability. A doctor in blue scrubs emerged through the swinging doors. Brenda shot up from her chair like a jack-in-the-box. Doctor? Is she Sao Jing Hao Ling, too? Is she okay? She is stable, the doctor said, looking exhausted. We repaired the hip, but the head trauma is significant. She is in a medically induced coma to allow the swelling to go down. We will know more in 48 hours. Sao Jing Haoling, Doi. Coma. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, thank God she is alive, she whispered. But, Sao Jing Haoling, Doi, doctor, even if she wakes up, Sao Jing Haoling, 2# is greater than will she be able to. Sao Jing Haoling, 2# is greater than make decisions? The doctor hesitated. It is too early to tell, but given her age and the severity of the injury, combined with the underlying cognitive decline you mentioned, Sao Jing Haoling, 2# is greater than it is likely she will need long-term care. Brenda nodded, wiping a tear. Long-term care. Yes, of course. I just want what is best for her. I saw the flash in her eyes. It was quick, like the strike of a match. Long-term care? That meant Martha was out of the picture. That meant the house was empty. That meant Brenda was now the de facto head of the household. She turned to look at me. Her expression was tragic, but her eyes were laughing. Did you hear that, Clara? She said softly. Grandma is going to need us to be strong. We have to make some hard decisions now. I stood up. I walked past her, past the social worker, past the doctor. I did not say a word. If I opened my mouth, I would scream until my throat bled, and that would only prove her point. I walked out into the cool night air of the parking lot. I got into my car and drove. Not home, not to the diner. I drove to an electronics store that was open late. I walked the aisles, my heart pounding a steady, martial rhythm. I found what I was looking for in the home security section. Nanny cams, Tanny, wireless cameras disguised as universal serial bus chargers and smoke detectors. I bought 3. I put the purchase on a credit card that was already maxed out, not caring about the interest rate. This was not about money anymore. This was war. I drove back to the house. It stood dark and silent against the night sky, looking like a tomb. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air still smelled of Brenda's sage and the metallic tang of dried blood on the hallway floorboards. I did not turn on the lights. I moved through the house like a burglar. I installed the first camera in the living room, plugging the fake charger into an outlet behind the sofa, angling it to cover the entire seating area. I put the second one in the kitchen, hidden on top of the refrigerator among the dusty cereal boxes. The third one went in Martha's bedroom, pointed directly at the bed. If Brenda was going to turn this house into a crime scene, I was going to turn it into a reality show. I sat in the dark living room and opened the app on my phone. 3 gray screens flickered to life. The resolution was grainy, but clear enough. I could see the empty recliner where Martha used to sit. I could see the spot on the floor where she had fallen. Sao Jing Haoling, 2# is greater than I waited. Brenda came home an hour later. She walked in, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. She did not look sad. She looked energized. She went straight to the kitchen. I watched on my phone screen as she poured herself a large glass of Martha's expensive wine. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. She put it on speaker. Hello? A man's voice, rough, impatient. It is done, Brenda said, taking a sip of wine. She fell. She is in a coma. The doctors say she is vegetable adjacent. I gripped my phone so hard I thought the screen would crack. Did you get the signature? The man asked. Not yet, Brenda said, but I have the social worker eating out of my hand. I will apply for emergency guardianship tomorrow. Once I have the paper, I can list the house. I need you to hold off the guys for another week. Tell them the money is practically in the bank. You are playing a dangerous game. Brenda, the man warned. I am winning the game. Brenda corrected him. And listen, the granddaughter, Saoyuting Hao Ling, 2 is greater than she is. A problem. She knows too much. What do you want to do about her? Brenda paused. She swirled the wine in her glass. I might need your help with that. If she keeps sniffing around. Saoyuting Hao Ling, 2 is greater than maybe she needs to have an accident too. Or maybe we just plant something in her car. Some pills? A little stash? Get her parole revoked before she even starts. I stopped breathing. Plant something in her car. She was not just planning to steal the house. She was planning to destroy me. She was going to frame me for possession, send me to prison, and erase me from the equation entirely. I watched her hang up the phone. She laughed to herself, a soft, satisfied chuckle, and refilled her glass. I sat in the darkness of the upstairs hallway, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The evidence was recording every word, every threat, but it was not enough. A recording of a phone call might not be admissible. She could claim she was acting or joking. I needed more. I needed a confession, a direct, undeniable confession to the camera. I needed her to look me in the eye and say it. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Martha was still unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped in a rhythmic, terrifying cadence. Her face was bruised purple and yellow, swollen like a piece of overripe fruit. I sat by her bed. I held her hand. It felt cold and dry. I am sorry, Grandma, I whispered. I am so sorry I let her in. I looked at the intravenous bag dripping into her arm. Saline, antibiotics. And then I had an idea, a dangerous, insane idea. Brenda was coming later. She would want to play the grieving daughter again. She would want to make sure Martha stayed asleep. I went to the nurse's station. The nurse was busy on the phone. I saw the cart of medications parked outside a room down the hall. I am not proud of what I did next. I am not a thief, but survival changes your definitions of right and wrong. I waited until the hallway was clear. I swiped a small vial of saline solution and a syringe from the unlocked drawer of the cart. It was reckless. It was criminal. I went back to the room. I waited. When Brenda arrived an hour later, I was sitting in the corner, looking defeated. She is not waking up, I said dully. Brenda walked over to the bed. She stroked Martha's hair. It is for the best. Clara, she sighed. She is at peace. I stood up. I walked over to the bedside table where Brenda had placed her purse. I saw the familiar orange prescription bottle poking out of the side pocket. The haloperidol. She had brought it. Why? To slip into the intravenous line? To make sure Martha stayed under? I need to go to the cafeteria. I said, do you want anything? No. Brenda said, not looking at me. Just go. I left the room, but I did not go to the cafeteria. I stood just outside the door, watching through the crack. Brenda looked around. She checked the hallway. Then, she reached into her purse. She took out the orange bottle. She opened it and shook 2 pills into her hand. She crushed them quickly with the bottom of a water glass on the tray table. She dissolved the powder in a small cup of water. She pulled a syringe, her own syringe, from her bag. She drew up the cloudy liquid. She turned to the intravenous port. I watched her inject the poison into my grandmother's line. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She was actively murdering her, but I did not burst in. I did not scream. because I knew something Brenda did not know. 10 minutes before she arrived, I had clamped the intravenous line under the sheet. The fluid was not flowing into Martha's vein. It was pooling in the tube. Brenda finished the injection. She unclamped the port, or thought she did, and smoothed the sheets. She smiled down at her mother. "Sleep tight." "Mom," she whispered. I walked away from the door, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. I went to the bathroom and vomited into the sink. I had the video on my phone. I had the footage of her injecting an unknown substance into the intravenous line, but I needed the finale. I needed the house. I needed the signature. I washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, ghostly. My eyes were dark hollows. Tonight, I told my reflection, tonight we end it. I went back to the room. Brenda was sitting in the chair, reading a magazine. "Mom," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a girl who had given up. "What?" Brenda asked, turning a page. "You are right," I said. "We should sell the house. I want the money. I want to go to Paris." Brenda lowered the magazine. She looked at me, searching for the lie. "Are you serious?" she asked. "I am tired," I said. "I am tired of being poor. I am tired of fighting. If she is going to a home anyway, 少于静好令, 2# is greater than why should we lose everything." Brenda smiled. It was the smile of the devil welcoming a new soul to hell. "Finally," she said. "You are finally growing up. Clara, let us go home." I said, "Let us celebrate." I led her out of the hospital. I led her back to the house, back to the cameras, back to the trap. Tonight, there would be wine. Tonight, there would be confessions. And tomorrow, there would be blood. The drive back from the hospital was a study in silence. It was not the comfortable silence of companionship, nor the angry silence of a fight. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a predator and prey who have temporarily agreed to share a waterhole. Brenda drove my car. Her hands relaxed on the steering wheel, humming along to a pop song on the radio. She looked lighter, younger. The prospect of imminent wealth had acted like a facelift, smoothing out the lines of worry around her eyes. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the suburban landscape of Ohio blur past in streaks of gray and green. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers ached. Inside that device lay the digital trigger of a bomb I was waiting to detonate. But it was not enough. The footage from the hospital was damning. Yes, but a good lawyer could argue context. A good lawyer could argue I had doctored it. Just as Brenda had claimed, I doctored the police reports. I needed her to hang herself. I needed a confession so visceral, so detailed, that no amount of charisma could wash it away. "We need to celebrate," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Flat, calm, detached. "If we are going to do this, Mum, we need to do it right." Brenda glanced at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Now you are talking," she said. "There is a liquor store on 4th Street. Let us get something that actually tastes like success. None of that cheap swill you usually buy." We stopped at the store. Brenda picked out a bottle of Grey Goose vodka and a bottle of expensive champagne. She paid with a credit card that I knew she had stolen from Martha's wallet days ago. I watched the transaction, cataloging it in my mind as another charge to be added to the indictment. When we got back to the house, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the porch. The house looked innocent, It looked like the kind of place where cookies were baked and holidays were celebrated. Nobody walking by would guess that inside, the walls were lined with betrayal, and the air was thick with the intent to defraud. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. My eyes flicked instinctively to the bookshelf in the living room, then to the top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The tiny green lights of the cameras were taped over, invisible to the naked eye, but I knew they were there. I felt their presence like a safety net. "Let us go to the living room," Brenda commanded, kicking off her shoes. She moved with the fluid arrogance of a queen returning to her castle. "Get the crystal glasses, Clara, the ones in the china cabinet." I went to the kitchen. I retrieved 2 heavy crystal tumblers. I placed them on a tray. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the slow, deliberate movements of my hands. I was about to perform the most difficult acting role of my life. I had to be the daughter she wanted, corruptible, greedy, and submissive. I walked into the living room. Brenda was already sprawled on the sofa, right in the center of the camera's frame. She had lit a cigarette, using one of Martha's favorite saucers as an ashtray. I poured the vodka. I made hers a double. No, a triple. "Here is to the future," Brenda said, raising her glass. "To Paris," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. I took a small sip. The vodka burned my throat. A cleansing fire. Brenda downed half of her glass in one swallow. She sighed, a long sound of release, and leaned back into the cushions. "You know, Clara," she said, her eyes drifting shut, "I never thought you had it in you. I always thought you were too soft, too much like your father. He was a weak man. He thought love was about sacrifice. And what is love about?" I asked, sitting in the armchair opposite her, careful not to block the camera's line of sight. "Survival," Brenda said. She opened her eyes and looked at me. "Love is about who is strong enough to make the hard choices. Look at your grandmother. She spent her whole life saving, scrimping, denying herself pleasure. And for what? To fall down the stairs and drool in a hospital bed? That is not a life. That is a tragedy." I gripped my glass. "But she loved us," I said softly. "She took us in when we had nowhere else to go." Brenda laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "She took us in because she wanted control. Clara, do not confuse charity with power. She wanted to be the matriarch. She wanted us to owe her, and I am done owing people." She finished her drink and held out the glass for a refill. I poured. The bottle was already a quarter empty. "I owe people too." I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have student loans. Mom, I have credit card debt. I was so scared I would never get out of this hole." Brenda's eyes lit up. This was a language she understood. The language of desperation. "See," she said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "That is why we are doing this. We are breaking the cycle. When we sell this place, you pay off your little debts, and you go to France. You find a rich husband. You never look back. But the house, Sao Yu Ting Haoling, 2 is greater than surely it will take months to sell?" I asked, playing the role of the worried accomplice. "Probate court takes forever." Brenda took a long pull of her cigarette, blowing the smoke directly toward the camera hidden in the bookshelf. "Not if I have the power of attorney," she said, her voice slurring slightly. I spoke to the social worker. She is filing the emergency petition tomorrow morning. Since I am the only child, and you are just Sao Yu Ting Haoling, 2 is greater than well, young and unstable. Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than the judge will sign off by Friday. I already have a buyer lined up. A buyer? I asked. Already? Brenda smirked. It was the smirk of someone who thinks they are the smartest person in the room. Cash buyer, she said. No inspections. No questions asked. A developer who wants to bulldoze it. He is offering $350,000 for a quick close. $350,000, I repeated. And we split it? 50-50, Brenda promised. I took a breath. Now was the time to push. Now was the time to twist the knife. But, Mom, I said, making my voice tremble with fake anxiety. What about the money you owe? I heard you on the phone. You owe a lot more than just a few credit cards. Brenda froze. The glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes narrowed. You were eavesdropping again? We are partners now, I said quickly. Partners do not keep secrets. If we are going to do this, I need to know the numbers. How much do you really owe? Brenda stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then, the alcohol one. She shrugged, the tension leaving her shoulders. $80,000, she admitted. $80,000 to a syndicate in Columbus. They run the gambling rings inside the prison system. I got Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than board. I played some poker. I lost. Then I tried to borrow to win it back. You know how it goes. 80,000, I whispered. That is a lot of money. They are not nice people. Clara, Brenda said, her voice dropping. They told me if I did not have the cash by the end of the month, they would start breaking things. Fingers, kneecaps, faces. That is why I came back. I did not come back for the nostalgia. I came back because this house is my get-out-of-jail-free card. I felt a chill run down my spine. She was not just greedy. She was desperate. A desperate animal is capable of anything. So, Grandma, Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than she was just an obstacle. I asked. Brenda laughed again. But this time, there was no humor in it. It was pure malice. She was a wall, Clara, a stubborn, ancient wall standing between me and my life. I tried to be nice. I tried to ask her for a loan. Do you know what she said? She said I needed to learn responsibility. Me, a 42-year-old woman. She took a massive gulp of vodka. So I had to. Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than accelerate her retirement. I leaned forward. This was it, the moment of truth. What did you do? Mom? I asked softly. Did you really just? Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling. 2. Let her fall. Brenda looked at me. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. She was drunk on vodka and power. She felt safe. She felt like she was talking to a mirror version of herself. Let her fall, she scoffed. Clara, gravity is too unreliable. I helped her. My stomach lurched. You pushed her? I asked. I nudged her. Brenda corrected, waving her hand dismissively. She was dizzy anyway. I have been putting haloperidol in her tea for a week. Just enough to make her wobbly. Just enough to make her look senile to the neighbors. When she was at the top of the stairs, Xiao Yi Jing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than I just gave her a little encouragement. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another thing to hear it spoken aloud in the living room where I had grown up. She could have died. I said, she should have died. Brenda snapped, slamming her glass down on the table. It would have been cleaner. No hospitals, no social workers, just a funeral and an inheritance. But no, she had to be stubborn. She had to survive. So now we have to do it the hard way. The hard way? I asked. The nursing home. Brenda said, I found one. It is 2 towns over. It is called Shady Acres, or some nonsense. It is a warehouse for the indigent. It smells like urine and bleach, but it is cheap. The state pays for it. We dump her there. We sell the house, and we vanish. She leaned back, a cruel smile spreading across her face. She will not last 6 months in there. Brenda said, without her organic food and her knitting club, she will give up. And then, Saoting Haoling, 2 hash is greater than we are free. I stared at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked for a shred of humanity, a flicker of remorse. There was nothing, just a black hole of need and narcissism. You are a genius. Mom, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Brenda beamed. She preened under the compliment. I am a survivor, Clara, and now, so are you. She reached for the bottle again, but her hand was clumsy. She knocked it over. Vodka spilled across the coffee table, soaking into the wood. Oops, Brenda giggled. Party foul. She tried to stand up, but her legs buckled. She collapsed back onto the sofa, her head lolling to the side. I think Saoting Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than I think I need a nap. She mumbled, wake me up. Saoting Hao Lin, 2 hash is greater than when the check clears. She closed her eyes. Within seconds, her breathing deepened into a rhythmic snore. I sat there for a long time. I watched her sleep. She looked peaceful. She looked like an angel. It was the ultimate deception. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the bookshelf. I reached behind a stack of paperbacks and pulled out the tiny camera. The green light was still blinking. I stopped the recording. I took the camera from the kitchen. I took the camera from the bedroom. I gathered them all and put them in my pocket. Then I walked over to the sleeping form of my mother. I looked down at her. You wanted a partner, Brenda, I whispered. You wanted someone strong enough to make the hard choices. I picked up the empty vodka bottle. I wiped my fingerprints off the neck with the hem of my shirt. I placed it gently on the floor beside her hand. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. Not the police. Not yet. I dialed the number for Martha's lawyer. Mr. Henderson. It was late, but he had given me his personal cell number when Martha was admitted to the hospital. Hello? His voice was groggy. Mr. Henderson. I said, this is Clara Vance. I have something you need to see. Tonight. Tonight? Clara. It is 11 o'clock. It is about Brenda. I said, it is about the house, and it is about attempted murder. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then, the rustle of sheets. I am listening. He said, I am coming to your house. I said, I have video evidence. Do not call the police yet. We need to catch her when she thinks she has won. Saoting Haoling. 2. I hung up. I walked back to the living room one last time. Brenda mumbled something in her sleep. Twitching slightly, I looked at the spilled vodka, the cigarette butt burning out in the saucer, the shattered family portrait of our lives. Enjoy your nap. Mom, I said, it will be the last comfortable sleep you have for a very long time. I turned off the lights, leaving her in the dark, and walked out into the cool night air. The war was over. The execution was about to begin. The morning of the signing arrived with a sky so blue it felt mocking. It was the kind of pristine, golden sunlight that belonged in a detergent commercial. Not the final act of a family tragedy. Inside the house, Brenda was vibrating with a manic energy that even 3 layers of foundation could not hide. She had woken up with a headache that she blamed on the weather, but I knew it was the lingering ghost of the vodka bottle she had drained the night before. She was wearing white, a crisp, a linen dress that made her look like a benevolent nurse or a martyr. She had set the dining room table with fresh flowers she had stolen from the neighbor's garden before dawn. There was a plate of store-bought cookies arranged in a fan shape on the good china. It was a stage set. I sat in the corner of the room, holding the remote control for the television in my lap. My hands were cold, but my heartbeat was slow and steady. I felt like a sniper waiting on a rooftop. The guests began to arrive at 10 o'clock. First was Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who had handled my grandfather's estate decades ago. He was a tall man with gray hair and a face carved from granite. He carried a leather briefcase that smelled of old paper and authority. He looked at me as he entered. A brief, imperceptible nod that told me he was ready. He knew. I had shown him everything last night. Next came the neighbors. Mr. and Mrs. Gable. They were the witnesses Brenda had requested. Kindly, nosy people who had brought a casserole and a look of practiced sympathy. Brenda greeted them with a hug that lingered a second too long, performing her grief for the audience. "Thank you so much for coming," Brenda whispered, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "It is such a hard day, but we have to do what is best for Mom. She needs professional care." Mrs. Gable patted Brenda's arm. "You are so brave, dear. Most children would not have the strength to let go." I watched this from my corner. The nausea that usually accompanied Brenda's lies was gone. It had been replaced by a grim anticipation. Then, the main event. I went to the downstairs bedroom where we had set up a temporary hospital bed. Martha was sitting in a wheelchair. She was slumped over, her head lolling to one side, a blanket tucked around her legs. She looked small. She looked defeated. I wheeled her into the dining room. The wheels squeaked on the hardwood floor, a high-pitched sound that made everyone look up. "Here she is," I said quietly. Brenda rushed over. She knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Martha's limp hand in hers. "Mom," Brenda cooed, "Mr. Henderson is here. We are just going to sign some papers to make sure you are taken care of. You do not have to worry about a thing." Martha did not respond. She stared at the floral centerpiece, her mouth slightly open. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. The transfer of the deed, the power of attorney, the new will. "Are you sure she is lucid enough to sign?" Mr. Henderson asked. His voice was neutral, professional. Brenda sick-had, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. "She has her moments," Brenda said, "but we discussed this at length before her fall. This is what she wanted. I am just executing her wishes." The doctor said she might be confused today, but her intent was clear. She picked up a pen. She placed it in Martha's trembling hand. She wrapped her own fingers around Martha's, guiding the tip of the pen toward the signature line. "Just right here." "Mom," Brenda whispered, "just a little scribble, then you can rest." The room was silent. The Gables were watching with sad, respectful expressions. The only sound was the scratching of the pen against the paper as Brenda forced Martha's hand to move. "Wait," I said, my voice cut through the silence like a whip. Brenda looked up, annoyance flashing in her eyes. "Clara, not now," she hissed. "I think we should watch something first," I said. I stood up and pointed the remote at the large television mounted on the wall above the fireplace. I made a tribute video for Grandma before she leaves this house forever. Brenda froze. Her smile faltered. Clara, this is hardly the time. Sao Ting Haling. Jing Hao Dayu. It will only take a minute. I interrupted. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. But it was not a montage of old family photos set to sentimental music. It was the grainy, gray-scale footage from the living room. The timestamp in the corner read 11:30 at night. The audio was crisp. She was a wall. Clara, a stubborn, ancient wall standing between me and my life. The voice boomed through the dining room. It was Brenda's voice. Slurred, arrogant, and cruel. Mrs. Gable gasped. Mr. Gable dropped his fork. Brenda stood up, dropping Martha's hand. The pen clattered to the floor. What is this? Brenda demanded. Her face went pale beneath the makeup. Turn it off, Clara. Turn it off right now. I did not turn it off. I turned the volume up. I just gave her a little encouragement. The Brenda on the screen said, waving a glass of vodka. I nudged her. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of everyone's lungs. Brenda lunged toward me, her hands reaching for the remote. It is a deep fake, she screamed, her voice shrill and terrified. She made it with a computer. She is trying to frame me. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Turn it off, she shrieked. Get your hands off my granddaughter. The voice did not come from the television. It came from the wheelchair. Brenda froze. We all turned. Martha was sitting up straight. The slump was gone. The confusion was gone. She pushed the blanket off her legs. She gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. And then she stood up. It was a miracle of biblical proportions. Or so it seemed to the neighbors. Mrs. Gable let out a small scream. But I knew the truth. I had swapped the haloperidol for sugar pills 3 days ago. Martha had been awake since yesterday morning. She had been waiting. She had been acting. Brenda backed away, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mom? She whispered. Sao Ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than you can stand? Martha took a step forward. She was bruised. She was bandaged. But she stood tall, radiating a fury that filled the room. I can stand, Martha said. Her voice was not loud, but it was heavy with judgment. And I can hear. Brenda looked from Martha to the television, where the video was still playing. Brenda laughing about the nursing home that smelled of urine. Mom, please, Brenda stammered, raising her hands in surrender. That, Sao Ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than that was just the alcohol talking. I was stressed. I did not mean it. I love you. I was trying to save us. Save us? Martha repeated. She walked over to the table and picked up the deed Brenda had tried to make her sign. She looked at it, then looked at her daughter. You were trying to bury me. Mr. Henderson stepped forward. He closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. I believe my services are no longer required for this transaction, he said coldly. However, I will be retaining this video evidence, and I believe the police are already on their way. Claire called them 10 minutes ago. The police? Brenda's eyes went wild. She looked at the door, then at the window. The trap had snapped shut. You set me up, she spat, turning on me. You little witch. You set me up. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just looked at her with the same cold detachment she had shown me for 20 years. I just let you be yourself. Mom, I said. Brenda looked around the room. The Gables were looking at her with pure revulsion. Mr. Henderson was blocking the hallway. Martha was looking at her with a heartbreak so profound it was painful to witness. "Get out," Martha said. "But Mom, sao yu jing hao ling, or jing hao dayu." "Get out," Martha screamed. The sound tore through her throat, raw and agonizing. "Get out of my house. You are not my daughter. My daughter died a long time ago. You are just a thief wearing her face." Brenda flinched as if she had been slapped. She looked at the deed on the table, then at the open door. She realized there was no charm left to cast, no lie left to spin. She grabbed her purse. She did not look at me. She did not look at Martha. She ran. She ran out the front door, her heels clacking frantically on the porch steps. We heard her car engine roar to life, tires screeching as she peeled out of the driveway. The room was quiet again. The television screen had gone black. Martha swayed. I rushed forward and caught her before she could fall, lowering her back into the wheelchair. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. It was the sound of a mother mourning the living. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her frail shoulders. I looked up at Mr. Henderson. He nodded solemnly. I looked at the Gables. They were pale, traumatized by the scene they had just witnessed. They would tell everyone. By tomorrow morning, the entire town would know. Brenda Vance was not a guru. She was a monster. I rested my head on Martha's knee. I had won. The house was safe. The money was safe. But as I listened to my grandmother weep for the woman who had tried to kill her, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor standing in the ashes of a bridge I had just burned. The departure of Brenda Vance did not feel like a cleansing. It felt like an amputation. The house, once filled with her chaotic energy and the cloying scent of white sage, was now abruptly, violently silent. The air felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out along with her. Mr. Henderson stayed for an hour after she fled. He was efficient, clinical. He helped me gather the papers, secured the video file on an encrypted drive, and promised to file a restraining order by the end of the business day. The Gables left quickly, murmuring apologies and clutching their casserole dish like a shield, desperate to escape the blast zone of our family implosion. When the front door finally clicked shut, locking the world out, Martha and I were left alone in the wreckage. Martha sat in her wheelchair by the window, staring out at the empty driveway. The sun had moved across the sky, casting long, melancholy shadows through the lace curtains. She had not spoken a word since she told Brenda to leave. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, rested lifelessly in her lap. I made tea. It was a reflex, a futile attempt to impose normalcy on a situation that was anything but. I carried the tray into the living room, the china rattling softly. "Grandma?" I said gently. She did not turn. "She is gone," Martha whispered. "Yes," I said, placing the tray on the coffee table. "She is gone. You are safe now." "Safe," Martha repeated. The word sounded foreign in her mouth. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but behind the grief, there was something else. A cold, hard glint of recognition. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. I froze. The teapot suspended in midair. "You knew she was poisoning me." Martha continued. Her voice was steady, devoid of the frailty she had feigned for the camera. "You knew for days. You swapped the pills. You let her think she was winning." I set the teapot down slowly. "I had to, Grandma. I had to get proof. If I had just told you, Sao Yu Jing Hao Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu. If you had told me, I might have believed you, Martha snapped. Or maybe I would not have. But you did not give me the chance. Clara, you used me. You used me as bait. She looked at the bruise on her arm where the intravenous line had been. You watched her inject that syringe, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and awe. You stood outside the door and watched your mother try to kill me. And you let her do it because you knew the line was clamped. I saved you, I said, my voice rising in defense. I saved the house. I saved everything. At what cost? Martha asked. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing a stranger. You are just like her. Clara, you have her eyes. You have her calculation. Do you think a normal girl could do what you did? Do you think a normal granddaughter films her mother confessing to murder while drinking vodka with her? I stepped back. The words hit me harder than Brenda's departure. I am nothing like her, I cried. She is a monster. I did this for you, did you? Martha asked quietly. Or did you do it to win? Did you do it to punish her? Because the Clara I raised, Xiao Jinghaoling, 2# is greater than the little girl who cried over dead birds. Xiao Jinghaoling. 2# is greater than she would have screamed the moment she found the poison. She would have called the police immediately. She would not have staged a production. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but the words died in my throat, because she was right. The girl who cried over dead birds was gone. She had died somewhere between the first red flag and the final recording. In her place stood someone colder, someone sharper, someone who knew how to manipulate the lighting and the angles to get the perfect shot. I walked over to the window. I looked out at the street where Brenda had disappeared. She was going to sell the house. Grandma, I said softly, she was going to throw you in a state home and let you rot. I did what I had to do to survive. Martha said. It was a long, rattling sound that seemed to come from the very bottom of her soul. I know, she said, and I am grateful. I am. But Clara, Xiao Jinghaoling, R. Jinghao Dayu, she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was weak, but her skin was warm. I am afraid for you, she whispered. You stared into the abyss. Honey, and I think the abyss is looking back. We sat in silence for a long time. The tea went cold. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the room into twilight. Suddenly, a noise outside broke the stillness. It was not a car engine. It was a shout. I went to the window. Across the street, hidden in the shadows of the large oak tree, was a black sedan. It had been parked there for hours. I had noticed it earlier, but had been too distracted to care. Now, the door was open. 2 men were standing on the sidewalk. They were large, wearing dark jackets. They were looking at something on the ground near the end of our driveway. I squinted. There was a figure huddled against the brick pillar of the gate, a woman in a white dress, now stained with dirt and grass. It was Brenda. She had not driven away. She had driven to the end of the block, realized she had nowhere to go, no money, no cards, and had come back. But she had not come to the door. She was lurking, perhaps waiting for us to sleep. But the men had found her first. I watched as one of the men grabbed her by the arm. She screamed, but it was cut short as he shoved her toward the car. Is that Xiao Jinghaoling? 2# is greater than, is that her? Martha asked from behind me. Do not look, I said. I watched. I did not call the police. I did not run out to help. I watched as Brenda Vance, the woman who had terrorized us, the woman who had tried to kill her own mother for $80,000, was forced into the back seat of the black sedan. The car door slammed shut. The engine purred. A low, menacing growl. The car pulled away, disappearing into the night. She was gone, really gone this time. The debt collectors had come to collect. I turned away from the window. I closed the curtains. Is she gone? Martha asked again. Yes, I said. She is gone. I walked back to the sofa and sat down. I picked up my cold cup of tea. The house was safe. The mortgage was paid. The enemy had been neutralized. But as I looked around the room, at the shadows stretching across the floor, I felt a profound, hollow emptiness in my chest. I had won the war, but I was the only soldier left standing on the battlefield, and the ground beneath my feet was scorched earth. Martha looked at me with that same mixture of gratitude and fear. We were safe? Yes, but we would never be the same. The trust that binds a family together had been severed, not by Brenda's knife, but by my own surgical precision. I took a sip of the bitter, cold tea. It tasted like victory, and it tasted like ash. 6 months later, the snow in Dayton had finally melted, revealing the gray, salted earth beneath. The house on Elm Street looked the same as it always had. The paint was still peeling slightly on the shutters, and the porch swing still squeaked in the wind. But inside, the architecture of our lives had been completely gutted and rebuilt. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the same table where I had thrown a glass of wine at my mother, and the same table where my grandmother had stood up from her wheelchair to deliver her final verdict. Today, the surface was covered in legal documents. Mr. Henderson pushed a heavy ballpoint pen toward me. Sign here. Clara, he said softly. An initial at the bottom of the page. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name in cursive. The loops and curves sharp and decisive. Clara Vance. With that signature, I became the sole beneficiary of the Vance estate. The deed was now a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. When Martha passed, the house would be mine. The savings accounts, the bonds, the antique furniture, all of it was legally locked down. Brenda could return from the grave, and she would not be able to touch a single teaspoon. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said. Martha sat across from me. She was knitting again, but her rhythm was off. She dropped stitches and did not bother to fix them. She looked at the papers, then she looked at me. Her gaze was dry. The warmth that used to define her, the grandmotherly indulgence that had once been my shelter, had evaporated. Are we finished? Martha asked. Her voice was polite. It was the voice one uses with a bank teller or a grocery clerk. We are finished. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Henderson said, packing up his briefcase. Your assets are secure. Clara has full power of attorney should you become incapacitated again. Martha flinched at the word incapacitated. She looked at the cup of herbal tea I had placed in front of her. She did not drink it. She had not touched a drink I prepared for her in 6 months without watching me pour it first. That was our new normal. She trusted me with her money, but she did not trust me with her life. I walked Mr. Henderson to the door. The air outside smelled of wet earth and worms. Any news on her? I asked quietly, standing on the porch. Mr. Henderson shook his head. Nothing. The police file is still open, but it has gone cold. Brenda Vance simply ceased to exist after that night. No credit card activity, no phone usage. It is as if she fell off the face of the earth. I nodded. I knew she had not fallen off the earth. She had been dragged into its underbelly. I thought about the black sedan, I thought about the men in the dark jackets. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if she was in a ditch, or a cell, or working off her debt in some basement in Columbus. I found that I did not care. I closed the door and locked it. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, satisfying thud. I turned back to the silent house. Martha had already gone up to her room. I could hear her footsteps on the floorboards above. Slow, deliberate, heavy. We lived together like two ghosts haunting the same castle, bound by blood and a shared trauma, but separated by a wall of glass. I walked into the kitchen. I picked up the mug of tea Martha had left untouched. I poured it down the sink. I went to the hallway mirror, the one Brenda used to check her makeup in. I looked at my reflection. I was 21 now. My face had thinned out. My eyes were harder. I wore better clothes. I had used the first disbursement from the trust to buy a new wardrobe. No more diner uniforms. No more stained sneakers. I looked like a woman who owned things. I leaned closer to the glass. I searched for Brenda in my features. I saw the curve of her jaw. I saw the icy blue of her irises. I saw the capacity for ruthlessness that had saved us. Martha was right. I was not the girl who cried over dead birds anymore. That girl would have lost the house. That girl would be destitute. I was the girl who won. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. My sofa. I picked up a brochure for a nursing program in Paris. It was a pipe dream once. A fantasy Brenda had dangled to manipulate me. Now, it was a plan. I had the money. I had the means. In a year or two, when Martha passed, I would go. But for now, I was the gatekeeper. I looked at the spot on the floor where the blue vase had shattered. We had never replaced it. The empty space on the pedestal table was a monument to what we had broken to survive. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The house was quiet. It was safe. It was mine. I was alone. But as the silence pressed in around me, wrapping me in its cold, expensive embrace, I realized something that made me smile in the dark. I preferred the silence to the lies. I was a Vance, and for the first time in the history of this cursed family, the woman holding the keys was the one who knew exactly how to use them.